hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today from whatever time zone you are, and I hope you're having a very good day, night, evening, afternoon, and whatever suits you. And I'm pretty sure all of you have some kind of fascination towards the universe. How it was born. How it is doing. All of the amazing things we have, like black holes, singularities, dark energy, dark matter, and all of that wonderful stuff that you heard in Carl Sagan's Cosmos or Brian Greene's documentaries, or in The Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. And one of the ways to understand the universe deeply is by doing various experiments, by sending probes to space, by sending satellites. And in the last 30-40 years, loads of that stuff has happened. And very interestingly, this month itself has given some incredible findings about the universe through the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, popularly known as DESI. And today we are very happy and very grateful to have with us Miss Claire Lamman. She is a grad student at the Harvard Center for Astrophysics, working with Daniel Eisenstein. She is also a very prominent member of the DESI collaboration, and her work is on understanding these various aspects of the dark side of the universe, dark matter and dark energy, and how it shapes the evolution of the cosmos. She is also a very avid and very capable science communicator, and besides her various ways of communicating science through films and other mediums, she is also very much known for her incredible astronomy-based desserts and bakings. So thank you once again, Claire, for joining us today. And I would just like to start off with the first question. Like, what got you into science and what got you into being the incredible person you are today?
Thank you very much. I have been interested in astronomy and science for a long time. I'm one of those people who, even in kindergarten, was interested in planets and stars. And then as I got older, I became more interested in questions about cosmology. Where did the universe come from? How does it change? And I would say my background is not necessarily typical. So there are most of the people around me actually came into astronomy a bit later in life. So that's I think people maybe don't realize it's not necessarily the usual path, but I've always been interested in it, and I was fortunate to have grandparents and parents who encouraged this interest. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to learn about space and astronomy in school. That was a little unfortunate, but they took me to museums. They dragged me out of bed at 2 a.m. to go look at meteor showers or lunar eclipses, and I watched a lot of documentaries too of like science and learning about it through that.
Yeah, that is incredible. And like another question that we usually ask our scientists is that if you were not a scientist, what would you want to be? Like, we know that you bake some incredible desserts, but like besides that.
Yeah, I actually don't think I would like to be a baker. It's too much hard work. You always have to wake up early. You're on your feet. Cleaning dishes is such a pain. This is a good question. I think I might be an artist of some type. I always really liked art growing up. I was really involved with it, art and music. And even in high school for a while, I was considering taking a different path, because I think as a young student, people around me knew me more as a creative person. I felt like my identity in high school was built more around art than necessarily being good at math or science. However, science is what always kept my attention more. So I decided to try it out in undergrad, and it ended up, I found I was able to apply my creative skills to science in ways I didn't quite realize before. So it ended up working out for me, but I think, yeah, I always wonder about what it would be like to be an artist full time.
Yeah, that must be amazing. And you just share that you got involved in like cosmology and astrophysics by seeing all these meteor showers while growing up a lot. But then, eventually you would have seen that this field is like huge, like there are loads of things to do. So like, how did you get started in like dark energy research? And like what, like if anyone searches you on Google, they see this word observational cosmologist. So like, what does that mean?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with the first part of your question, how I got into studying about dark energy. Like many people, these like big questions about the universe always captivated me growing up. But my path to becoming a cosmologist was not linear. I actually studied M dwarfs, which are really small red stars in undergrad. And when I was applying to grad schools, although I liked cosmology, I was more thinking about what type of advisor I'd like to work with rather than the topic. And so I like my advisor quite a lot now. It worked out well. Um, and I fortunately was able to get into cosmology. But I would say I often get emails or messages from people saying that they want to study cosmology. Maybe they're high schoolers or early undergrads, and they're very set on cosmology. And I would caution people against getting too set on one field in astronomy, because especially when you're starting out in research, the main skills you need to build are the same no matter what subfield you're in. Programming, the basics of and methodologies of research. So I studied tiny, small stars, and now I study the big, the largest structures in the universe. So I would advise people not to get too stuck on the idea of one field, but in undergrad, that's the chance to really develop the skills that you'll need and maximize your opportunities in the future by starting out with those basics. As an observational cosmologist, I look at data we get from the real universe and think about what it can tell us about the universe, the universe itself, and the nature of the components that make it up. So I think as an observational cosmologist, the work falls into two areas. The first is constraining or figuring out parameters of existing models that we have about the universe, or even distinguishing between those two models. So a lot of this involves things like measuring Hubble constant, the parameters of dark energy, gravity. Then the other component, which I find a little bit more exciting, is looking for different signals, different ways of measuring things, quantifying the universe, and seeing if you find anything interesting or odd that's maybe not connected to a theory yet, and then think about how to interpret it. In practice, cosmology nowadays involves a lot of thinking about systematic errors. So we have a lot of data, which is really great. We're getting really very precise measurements of the universe. But because of this, we have to think about so many different sources of systematic errors that it can get really, really into the weeds. And so I think people would be surprised at all the different things we have to model and think about, because when you're measuring something over millions of galaxies, there's just one tiny, like just a part in 1,000 bias that can actually affect your measurement. So yeah, I hope that it's a satisfactory answer to what an observational cosmologist works on.
Yeah, that is quite a intricate answer and a very detailed one. And like, thanks for that actually. And you like mentioned, some stuff about like the Hubble constant and like, parameters for dark energy. And so, like to anyone, who is not from the field and, has been like reading up science articles, there's this thing that DESI has been measuring this equation of state parameter and like all of that stuff. So like, what does the DESI results actually tell us about the current expansion phase of the universe?
Yeah, so I think I could give like a brief background on DESI before getting into this. We are measuring the positions of millions of galaxies using spectroscopy. So we have a very special instrument on a telescope that will allow us to get slit spectroscopy of thousands of objects in mere minutes. And using this innovative telescope, we are able to map out the positions of galaxies. These trace out the underlying massive structures of dark matter. The two main goals of DESI are to measure both how the geometry of the universe expands and then also how this large scale structure itself evolves. The results that came out for DESI a few weeks ago was more on this geometry, this expansion. We use something called baryon acoustic oscillations, which are fluctuations in the primordial universe that cause this overdensity of matter at a characteristic scale. And then as the universe expands, you see this overdensity of matter expanding with it. And then in practice, this means that when you measure how clustered galaxies are, you tend to see an excess of galaxies at some specific separation. And this separation corresponds to the size of the bubbles that started in the very early universe. So by measuring the size of these basically bubbles of, or you can think of them as shells of galaxies in some way, by measuring their size over time, we can get an idea of how the universe has expanded. We released our first cosmology results a few weeks ago, which were on the measurements of this BAO. And our measurements are consistent with the most commonly accepted model of the universe, which includes a model of dark energy that is constant throughout time. Although they slightly prefer a version where dark energy evolves. So the distinction between these is important. One of the weird things about dark energy I always learned in cosmology classes is this idea that it appears to be constant, which means that the density of dark energy is the same even as the universe grows. It is really counterintuitive. If you have like stuff in a volume and that volume is growing, you think the density goes down, but it doesn't appear that dark energy has that effect. So maybe it's some property of the vacuum. And although this is weird, to me, it actually makes a little bit more sense or it seems a little bit more intuitive than a dark energy, which might slightly change with the evolution of the universe. That would be odd and quite interesting. Although the difference in actual signals you observe versus for a model with a constant vision of state for dark energy versus evolving is really small. And so we need really precise measurements, and we have to also combine our measurements with other things we know about the universe, like from the cosmic microwave background. We also combine it with supernova data. And so the DESI survey is going to last 5 years. We're taking 5 years of data, and all these results just come from the first year. So like I said again, the results themselves don't necessarily disprove lambda CDM, the version with a constant state of dark energy. But especially when you compare it with other things we have seen in the universe, there's a slight preference to a version of dark energy which evolves. And that would be very interesting, exciting. But I think that the headline is that not necessarily that, dark energy may be changing, but that we see something exciting and we're about to get a lot more data. And to me, that's the interesting part, is the fact that this is just 1 out of 5 years. We have 4 more years left of data, and this will be able to say more conclusively whether or not dark energy is the same throughout cosmic time.
Right, thank you so much for that very detailed answer. And actually, I was gonna ask the next question, as whether or not these results have some kind of a foreshadowing for the lambda CDM, but I think you have already answered that. So I would actually go to the next question, which is kind of personal as well, because I am also a part of the LSST collaboration, and like my field is like kind of like on the theoretical cosmology side of things. So personally for me, I think this would be the most interesting of all these questions, is that how do you see the field shaping up in the next few decades? Because we have Hubble tension and like all of these cosmic tensions at this time, and we also have other probes like Euclid and the other probes going up as well. So how do you think the DESI results alongside like next generation gravitational wave observatories, or like other probes which measure the CMB data will go hand in hand, and like what are your predictions in the long term?
I think especially in the next few years, we'll see a little bit more conclusive evidence for or against lambda CDM based off of DESI's measurements. We also have one of DESI's other main science goals is measuring redshift space distortions, which are like distortions in the clustering of galaxies due to their motions. It can actually tell us about how the large scale structure of the universe evolves and the balance between gravity and dark energy. So I'm excited to see those results, which will come out in the next, maybe by the end of the year for year one for ST analysis. And then more long term, I think the exciting aspects in cosmology are going to come not necessarily from one particular survey, but by synergies between them. So it's great. You're the one talking to me today because you can, LSST is going to be amazing. We'll have so much data and really high quality imaging of galaxies in the sky. This is really well complemented by DESI, which is getting spectra. So DESI can give us a really good idea of how far away galaxies are, and then you can combine that with LSST imaging, and we'll just have so much data in the next few decades. It will be a lot of work for cosmologists to go through in a good way. And I think we'll see some, I don't want to make too strong predictions on whether we'll resolve any tensions, because it's hard to say exactly where those might come from. But one thing that I think we will learn a lot more about is the connections between galaxies and the large scale structure. So DESI can tell us about the large scale structure itself. LSST can give us information on the galaxies, and you can actually find a lot of correlations between them. So how the galaxy shapes are connected to the web, and then how you can find interesting statistics with enough galaxies that you can actually use them to map out or find evidence of the tidal forces in the universe on really massive scales. And so that area is interesting to me because I think with so much data, there's so many new statistics you can look at that before you wouldn't be able to get high enough signal on to tell you anything.
Right. Thank you so much, once again for that. And I think, we have room for two extra questions, and these two questions were, asked by people who I, told that, I was going to meet you and this interview was going to happen. So both of these questions are from, PhD students in cosmology. So, we could possibly, go a level higher with these. So the first question is that, the DESI survey is working a lot on correlations in space, and correlations are very much related with correlation functions and non-Gaussianity. All right. So this guy knows his stuff. And so what is Claire's opinion on whether or not the new data can tell us something new about non-Gaussianity or primordial non-Gaussianity? So this is by Eddie.
Yes, I do think DESI can tell us about non-Gaussianity. There's a few people looking at it. It's not one of the main science goals of DESI, but with so much data, the results you would see from non-Gaussianity would be very subtle, would have very subtle imprints in galaxies. And now that you have enough data, you could conceivably measure them. More specifically, some of the more interesting ideas I've seen actually come from correlations between galaxies and large scale structures. You can actually look at how the shapes of galaxies are aligned, or the shapes of clusters are aligned. You can look at higher order correlation functions. And so there are a few different ideas I've seen floating around that take advantage of the spectroscopic data that DESI has. So the short answer is yes.
Right, thank you so much. And this is the last question that we have here. And I think this one is the most impactful as an academic, because now here we have Julian asking, you are currently a grad student, and of course after grad school comes postdocs. So how do you think a person who is interested in pursuing a career in academia in this day and age should go about this? Because he sees a lot of people going through loads of postdocs, and eventually the academic positions are very less, and people go into finance and tech industry and all that, but he wants to stay. So yeah, what would your recommendation or your suggestion or any insights in this direction? Actually, this was quite a long question, so I just had to condense it into 2 or 3 lines. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not sure I'm the person to be giving advice on this. I haven't even applied for jobs yet. I'll be doing that in a few months, I have noticed a larger fraction of people who are going into industry. And I think it's, even if you think you want to stay in academia, I think it's important to stay open. At least that's the mentality that I've had. I love research. I love teaching. But there are a lot of cool opportunities out there. And when people say industry, I think people think of industry as just some monolith where you go and you work at an office job from 9 to 5 and crunch numbers for a finance company or something. I don't know. But industry itself is comprised of so many different options. And I'm mostly speaking from friends I have who have gone into industry, looking at teaching or outreach or climate research, finance. There are a lot of options, and I think it's worth keeping an open mind and seeing what's out there. At least that's the mentality that I've had. For people who are really committed to staying in academia, at least the approach I've had is to think about how I can use data that is somewhat new. So information that we only have now, and look at questions that can only be answered with information we've gotten in the past few years. I think that is one way you can try to make your research stand out. Another thing I found, this might be more particular advice for me, but I invest a lot of time into making my results accessible and creating visualizations and like graphics for DESI. That has been a really valuable use of my time because it publicizes our results. It gets a wider audience. And then also, if you make a really good plot or graphic, a lot of people use it and they see your name, and that can be a good way to promote yourself in your research. So there's two. I try to think of advice that you might not hear all the time, but those are at least two of the things I've been focusing on.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. And actually, thank you so much once again for your time. This was, quite a conversation, and I'm sure, like people of all ages who are seeing this or who will be seeing this, whether they are high school students or, even like PhD students, like these two, would be very much enlightened by what you have, talked with us today. And we hope that you keep on making these kind of groundbreaking discoveries, and eventually we start seeing Claire Lamman in loads of documentaries ourselves. So yeah, thank you so much once again.
Well, thank you for your kind words. It's fun to talk with you.